Okay, nice. So today is February 22nd, 2024. My name is Sam Lee, and I'm here today with Miss Debra Baker on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. To begin with, could you please state your full name, where and when you were born?
Debra Tsuchiyama Baker, born Walter Reed Army Hospital, Washington, D.C., on May 21st, 1958.
Awesome. And how many siblings do you have? I guess that's a good first question.
I have none. I'm an only child.
Amazing. And we can maybe move on more into just your broader childhood. Could you kind of describe the household or neighborhood that you grew up in, both, physical, but also kind of like, the cultural values behind that?
Sure. So let me start a little bit back with, uh, so when I was born, my father was career military and he met my mother, in occupied Japan. He was occupying force. When they eventually came back to America with her and me, or with her, I was born, in Washington, D.C. He eventually retired from the military. But when I was born, we lived in D.C. for a while as a young child. I don't remember much about that. And then moved to a small town in southern Maryland called Shadyside, Maryland, sort of near Annapolis. But he was gone. They sent him to Germany. He did get orders to Vietnam, at which time he retired with 35 years of military service. But back to where I grew up, they were, living on a soldier's salary, so not much money. We lived in a very small house in Shadyside, which was a kind of a fishing community, boating, off the Chesapeake Bay. My mother did not drive. It was not unusual for women at that time. This was, in the 50s, early 60s, not to drive. But of course, she didn't speak English either. So, very difficult to come to, I think, a strange place. And then your husband leaves right away, leaves you in a small house with no car, no English speaking capacity, and a child. So, that was kind of how we grew up. Very small house. In fact, only a month ago, I went back for the first time in 50 years, and it was still there, and it looked even smaller. And I remembered it. It was
Oh,
tiny. But when you're a child, it doesn't look so small, but it was tiny. And she had to, so we grew up until I was in school. She had a sister who had come from Japan also, who was married to someone. And so they came every weekend and took us in the car to get groceries, to get food. We could go to the military bases and shop. And other than that, we were in the house, the two of us. She did start to teach me Japanese, unfortunately, which would have been a nice thing to know now since the world is such a small global place. But um, our community did not accept us at all. That is an understatement to say that. My father was accepted. He was white. We were not. We, could not go to people's houses. We could not visit. So we, and then when my father eventually came back from Germany, where he had been, or France, and doing maneuvers for the army, he basically said, "You have to stop speaking Japanese. That's part of the problem. We look different than you look different than everyone else. You sound different." So, that's a regret. It would have been, I see the people now, everyone is proud of speaking several languages and it's part of their heritage, and it should be. And when she came over on my father and their dog flew. She came over on the boat because she was not going to get on an airplane. And so when she came through to immigrate in, if you were Japanese, you could not keep your Japanese name. They required you to take, her name was Masako Tsuchiyama. So she was married and took my father's last name, Baker, but she had to get rid of her first name, and of course didn't read any English. So they just gave her a list of names and you just had to point.
mm.
And randomly she picked Patricia. So, it could have been anything, right? So that was, I think, that's a regret I have for her, and a regret she had before she died, that, we couldn't speak the language of our heritage, for fear of, even further sort of being ostracized or persecuted. she couldn't keep her name, which was sad. It's a pretty name. And so those are things that are, when we talk about that now, people are like, you're kidding. They made her get rid of her name. No one would think of that now. Everybody keeps their name. They have wonderful, interesting names from all over the world. And you would never hear anybody say, you have to give that up to come to the United States, but she did. And so, it just kind of gives you a sense of, how we grew up. And then, I do remember my earliest memories, and I've written about this, is my Outlook Veterans op-ed about being a young child. And, our little house, my bedroom, faced the street. And because we weren't invited or allowed in other people's houses, because there were no people of color, there was no other ethnicities, in Shadyside, Maryland in the early 60s. But you would see, you'd see the children playing out there. And then the worst part was the birthday parties. I had so many birthday parties, and they would walk down the street with little packages and presents, and you could see they were going, and I'd watch them, but I couldn't go. I wasn't invited. And so that was a lonely thing. When you grow up, I think like that, it's a question of being excluded. You see other people and they're different than you, but they're included and you're not. And that's culturally a little bit of a problem, I think, for immigrants and people who have first generation parents, because you're different. You don't know exactly why something's different, but you're a kid, so you don't know any background. You don't know why. It's just that they don't like you and you're different. And so I think that makes it harder to become, even more difficult to become a successful adult, because school is competitive and college is competitive and graduate school is competitive. And you always, I think a lot of people have a lingering doubt: am I as good as they are? Am I as smart? Am I as worthy? Am I as deserving? And those are things I think that people who immigrate or first generation children sometimes have to work through to get to where they want to go. And it's a little bit of a burden that others don't have. And people have different burdens. We all have our own. But that is one I saw commonly, throughout. And then it was mixed in when I was in uh, grade school. You could certainly know they had to let me go to school, but no one would sit with me. No one would eat lunch with me. It was very, it was very lonely, kind of scary. And then, really one of the best events of my life, and for many others, was desegregation, because, we had two schools in our little town. One was for the whites, one was for the blacks. And I, was sent to the white school because my father was white, and I wasn't black.
Mhm.
And when they desegregated in third or fourth grade, they combined the schools. Suddenly we had 90, 100 new children, and they all would play with me. So that was really a great thing. I thought that was sort of my first. This is progress. This is great. Here are all these other people. They don't look like the other folks in my neighborhood either, but they are fine to play with me and talk to me. And so that was a nice thing. And that was sort of the beginning of the change, because then, to be perfectly honest, the parents, people fought desegregation. They had their, racism was very real and still is to some extent in America. And so, it kind of paved the way. Um, I wasn't, I guess, as undesirable as I might have been earlier. And, there were other people that were different, and people had to start to get used to that. They had to start accepting you just can't exclude everybody all the time. And that was the beginning in grade school. So that was kind of a little bit of an example. Fourth grade was terrible. That is the grade where you study World War II. That is the movies of the kamikazes, the movies of the Japanese Zeros.
Yeah.
All eyes are on you. And, literally, I had to leave several times, and they were, stop crying. This is history. And I'm like, well, you know, people are looking at me like they just want to beat me up. And in fact, I did get beaten up several times. My parents, when you're an immigrant in an atmosphere like that, the last thing you want is to make trouble. You don't want to draw attention to yourself, and you don't want to make trouble. So, as a last resort, they would go to the school and complain, but not much was done. So I was happy to get out of grade school. That was high school, much better. Um, and then, of course, the world changed dramatically during those periods of time. I looked more Asian when I was young, not as much as I grew up into an adolescent. So people were like, well, you're Asian, you're Hispanic, you're Polynesian. I had a lot of, but they always very interesting. They all want to know what you are. What are you? And that's an interesting question. And so I identified as Asian American because our culture at home was Asian in a lot of ways. My mother had sushi every day. She made 3 or 4 rolls, set them on the counter. We ate it every day, which was interesting when I grew up, especially when I came to Texas and they all wanted to keep going out for Japanese food. I was like, oh no, not Japanese food again, because I grew up eating sushi. To them, it was a big novelty.
Mhm.
People loved it, and I love it, but I ate it every day for my whole life, so I wanted something different. So, those are sort of some of the earlier childhood memories, I think that shape who you are. And then I don't know if you have questions about that period of time before I go on.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like a lot, and I'm grateful you shared. I'm actually from San Diego, which is a very big like
Mhm.
naval military base. So I have met
Yep.
I have lots of friends that I had growing up who were, half Japanese, parents in the military. And I didn't realize how different things were back then because, a lot of my friends, they live kind of in the sections of the suburbs, which is more like military based. They have like discount to like, home pricing. And it seems that they have more of like this sense of community because they're all, part of a military family. So they get to play with each other. And I guess it made me kind of sad to hear, obviously, different times back then, segregation, like you mentioned, ostracization of like immigrants. So that seems like a lot. And, I'm grateful for, being able to listen to that. Um,
Well, I think I may be, one of the last generations that can remember, after World War II,
mm,
my parents had passed away, and that was a very unusual time. And I wrote a little bit about it in my editorial, but only later did I kind of figure it out. When you're a kid, you're just like, well, they don't like me, I should just be quiet and hide and not get in trouble. But I mean, truly, the two of us looked so different. And I just realized, the Japanese that had, invaded the country I live in. And, we were the face of the enemy. We looked like the people,
mhm,
that had killed their brothers and husbands,
yeah,
and sons. And, as an adult, I get that. I mean, it's a, I understand, people, feeling like that, especially those who had lost people. And, I think the disconnect that you hope for people is that they understand that those people didn't have anything to do with all of those things, but they still happened, right? And you get the little bit of the, maybe not backlash, but you get judged by it and lumped into that category. And I used to ask my mother, I said, well, so what did you know of the war? And she said, we knew nothing. She was 17, 18. She said, we knew nothing. And they didn't tell us anything, and we didn't know what was going on. And suddenly we were poor, nobody had any money, people were dying. And interestingly, as we grew older, and my father he was a wonderful man, career military, just a honest, hardworking person. And they didn't have much in common, I don't think. They stayed married, their entire lives. But I asked her, I said, well, why did you get married? What did you have in common? She said, well, nothing. She said, but if you're a Japanese woman and you want to get married and have a family, American GI, that's all there was, because everybody else was dead. There were no young Japanese men, no one to marry. And her sister first, married a GI, came to America. And that was those were the choices you had. Luckily, I think they had a very nice life by and large, and it very difficult, and I do remember her, she had to learn English from the soap operas on TV. And that led to an interesting phenomenon, which was, and everything was so dramatic, and so she spoke like, oh my God, you almost wanted to hear the organ music, or,
yeah.
everything was like this because that's how they spoke. on the soap operas. So she was a very dramatic Japanese lady because that's how she learned English. But it was a very different time as far as those kinds of things. So, but I felt later in my adult life, I felt really bad for both of them. They'd both been cheated, out of their youth. My dad went into the army when he was 15. They were in war when he was 20. She
Mm.
was, in her teens. Their years were spent, surrounded by uncertainty, not enough money, fighting, being shipped off to places. Her family really lost everything, and she didn't get to go to school. She didn't get to be educated, and none of those things. And then, later on in their 20s, they kind of skipped, 10 years that most of us get to enjoy our adolescence or young adulthood. And, for them, it was really more about survival. When you're in the army, every day could be your last. My dad got 2 bronze medals, active duty in Korea, and World War II. Combat duty. You don't know if you're coming home or not. And I think about it now. I have twin boys who are 32, and the thought of them when they're 20 years old being shipped off to shoot people is unbelievable
Yeah.
to me. But that was the life, they led. And then when you're on the other side, not being able to get things or food or money, and have things for yourself. Both her parents died in the war. She had to work at USO shows dancing, and that's how they met. But it's I feel like, having just my own kids, you always, as a parent, you want to do better for your children than what you had. And so, they've known really no significant hardship, in life. They're able to go to college and graduate school and live in a nice house and all those things. But, that each generation, you hope, does better than the last.
Yeah. I guess I have two just quick follow-up questions to kind of everything you've talked about so far. Firstly, you kind of mentioned like your father was really hardworking, honest. Maybe talk a little bit more about your parents, kind of like their traits and what they kind of emphasized in your upbringing, what they kind of taught you and guided you through. Um, and I'll save my second question for after that.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So starting with my dad, um, 35 years in the military, you live by code, very honest to a fault. And that some would say maybe that's a problem with lawyers. I don't know. I have no problem being honest, but that's not what they're known for.
Mm.
But and then to be a good person, be fair and honest were sort of the big things. The other things that were interesting is never, ever, not once, ever missed a day of work. Never called in sick. Never stayed home. Would just completely not be in their DNA. And I remember once we went to our little neighborhood store, and we went to buy something, charcoal bricks or something, and I went with him and came home, and he looked at his change and he said, "Oh my, that young gentleman, a young boy at the store gave me too much money. He gave me an extra $1.50 back. He didn't know how to make change." And he said, "Get in the car." I'm like, "Well, where are we going?" He said, "We're going to go back. We have to drive back because at the end of the day, they're going to take that money out of his paycheck because he didn't do it right. And that money's not ours. So we need to bring it back." And I really remember that. The other one was, if you work, wherever you work, you have to give the employer, they are paying for your time. There is no goofing off. If you're working 8 hours, you're working 8 hours. You're not checking, they didn't have phones back then, but you're not reading something, or you're not, making lists for personal reasons. It's, and that was a really big thing. My mom, she stayed at home until I was almost 7. And then a factory opened up near our home, and they were hiring stay-at-home moms to do just to wire computers, to follow a schematic. And,
Mm.
it was all by drawing. So she didn't need to speak English to do it. She could see the picture and put the plug here and the wire there. She loved it because, I think for her, very isolating to be home alone, and just the TV and a kid, and can't go anywhere. And that was great. My dad taught her to drive, and that was quite a memory. It did not go well. The station wagon went in the ditch, and there was lots of yelling, and it was very interesting, kind of amusing, but she did eventually learn to drive. And, they each had a Corvair. You remember Ralph Nader and the Corvair? That was the big scandal and back in the day, but they had small cars. And so, she was able to work, but same thing with her, never missed a day of work. And but that stuck with me as well. You said, even if you're, cleaning floors or trash cans, you do the best job of whatever job you had. When he came out of the army, there's a lot of GIs that, retired at a certain time, and it takes a while to find another job. So you've been in 35 years. He was only, 50 years old. He went in when he was 15. So he had to work, but you have to have money. You have to put money on the table to feed your family. And he worked for about a month at a night prison guard. I remember that. They would hire military thinking they could handle all the prisoners because they were tough guys. And he did that, midnight to 8 in the morning. And,
Wow.
and I'd be getting up to go to school and I'd say, how was your job? He said, I worked hard. I did everything I was supposed to do. And, I did I took two 15-minute breaks and a half an hour for lunch, and that was it. But that was their culture. The job was everything. Today it's very different. People are like, well, I'll take time off and go do something and whatever. And in those days, you had to have the job, or you wouldn't be able to provide for your family. So I think the culture and what they taught me, and it really did help me, is you work hard and you don't goof off, and someone hires you. I've had all kinds of different jobs, but you give them your all. Every
Mhm.
job, no matter how menial, no matter what, you do it and do a good job. And those were, and be honest and do the right thing and be fair. Those are just great things to live by for anyone, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I guess maybe kind of transitioning to my second question. I know you mentioned that you learned a little bit of Japanese language in the beginning and then that kind of tapered off. I guess, were there any cultural traditions or influences that you kind of had while being raised by, your Japanese mother?
Yes, absolutely. So, in Japan, women were more that, of the geisha type. They were there really, your cultural is to please. That women were trained to please men. That was the culture and time they lived in. But some of that came out through the arts. And so she was absolutely insistent that I sing and play the piano.
Mhm.
And I don't like to play the piano, but my golly, I was going to play, and I do, which is nice now. I didn't enjoy it much as a child, and they didn't have money or space for a piano. But I remember she just said to my father, Japanese girls dance and do music and sing. And so we somehow bought a used piano. It had to go in the dining room because there was no place for it. And, they scraped up money for once a week lessons the whole time I lived at home. So, but now I can play the piano, and, it's a wonderful thing just socially, but culturally, that flower arranging also very large. She would grow flowers. We didn't have money to buy store-bought flowers, but she
Mhm.
would grow them and arrange them every week in our house. And there's, ikebana is an art, Japanese flower arranging. And so that was another lesson, that I took, the flower arranging in addition to piano and to the culture now. And my kids grew up with this. They think everybody has fresh flowers, but every Friday on my way home from work, I go get flowers and I arrange them, some in the kitchen, some in the living room, and, very artful. I spend a lot of time making sure they look right, and that they, are artistic as best I can. That was something that I've carried through. I do have my mom and her sister were able to take some family things they had secreted away to this country. They sat in the Smithsonian for a while as exhibits of Japanese war brides in the country, and then she got them back when they passed away. I got them. Interestingly, my husband, his um, his real last name is Iwahiko, which is Japanese also. His father is half Japanese,
Mm.
and he's a American architect. No, from San Francisco. Was well known in San Francisco. Interestingly, when my husband moved here, he took a master's degree in architecture at Rice,
Mhm.
and the textbooks he used at Rice were teaching his father's
Wow.
work out of San Francisco. It was some of the early Japanesque
Oh.
structures you'd see in San Francisco, which had a large Japanese
Mhm.
population. And but interestingly, so he has comes from a culturally partially Japanese family as well. So when his father died, we got his Japanese artifact. So in our home, we have some wonderful Japanese pieces that are old.
Mhm.
They're 70, 80 years old. And so really happy to display them. We have screens, we have woodblock prints, we
Wow.
have ironwork, we have scrolls, we have dolls.
Uh-huh.
And it's wonderful to have that. And they're museum quality at some level, some of them are. So that's culturally, if you walked in our house, you would definitely say it's a Japanesque house.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It was Lunar New
Mhm.
Year recently. Did you guys celebrate that as well or no?
We did not, but we were aware of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can transition a little bit from, your amazing description of kind of your upbringing, a little bit more of maybe your educational experiences. I know you talked a little bit about grade school being a bit of a challenge, but you enjoyed high school a bit more. So maybe you can talk about, high school and maybe even college and what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy as much, and so forth.
Sure. High school, I don't know anybody that really likes high school too much. None of my kids did. I didn't. It's just a odd time. You're almost grown up, you're still a kid. We lived in the country. It's not the best place to grow up in high school. In Southern Maryland, people are often going to work in the tobacco fields. They're farmers, they're agriculture, they don't go to college. Most of them are at the time. It did not. So I graduated from high school in 1975. Three of us went to college out of my whole high school class.
Wow.
Everybody worked, in the fields and worked on the farm. And my 5-year reunion, 10-year reunion, they were very interesting. Um, there were awards for people that had the most babies. One woman had 6 in 5 years. um, the captain of the football team was driving a beer truck, which was very interesting. That was considered a good job, in the South. And then in my 10th year reunion, at that time, I'd finished college and gone to law school. The principal, I handed out my business card, and he said, "Did you have these printed up just for
Mhm.
the reunion?" And I was like, "No, I'm a lawyer." Couldn't believe it. I just didn't
Wow.
know anyone that had left from their school.
Mhm.
But so I did. I had no money. My parents, they got old. They were older parents when I was born, so they were ready to retire and go to Florida, and that's what they said they were going to do. I was only 16 at
Mhm.
that time, and I just said, "I'm not going with you because that's where old people live." And they're like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said,
Huh.
"Well, I'm going to get a job and figure out, how to go to college. I think I need to go to college."
Mm.
And they went to Florida. And so, I had my babysitting money and got a little apartment and got a job at a law firm in DC that they, at the time, in 1976, 77, they were paying that big dollars for it, legal secretaries. And you had to be 18, but I guess, a 6 can look like an 8, perhaps, on your application. And so I didn't know anything about lawyers. The only person I ever knew that went to college was my aunt's. Her name was Michiko
Mhm.
Tsuchiyama, my mom's sister. Her husband had gone to college, so he was the only one that
Wow.
had gone to college. And so I thought, well, I have to go to college. And so I had, got a job in the law firm, and I would read. It was very interesting. I would type, and I would read what they were writing. And as I got more confident, and they were very nice people, a wonderful law firm. I would say to the young associates, I was like, "Well, wouldn't your argument be better if you said it this way?"
Mhm.
And they were like, "Oh my God, the secretaries are telling us how to practice law now." I'm like, and my boss, the partner, would say, "No, she's right. You should try that." And it was, so they were very kind. I went to night college at University of Maryland. So I'd work in DC, 8:30 to 5, get in my car and drive to College Park, Maryland, go to school from 6 to 10 every night,
Mhm.
except Friday, and then spend all Saturday and Sunday doing my homework. I graduated summa cum laude. I never got to go to day school. I only went to night the whole
Oh,
time. And then in my last year, um, I looked around and I thought, well, what do I want to do? And I was really good at the writing and the legal analysis. And my firm, they were so kind, they started to let me do more. My boss, his name was Chuck Monahan. He was a partner at a firm called Miller and Chevalier. They're still in existence. They were a very the premier boutique on tax law. So they all were, very smart, good in the maths. But he was a partner there, and I was the same age as his children.
wow.
And I just remember he helped me immensely. But I got a lot of overtime. If I needed time off to study, I got time off to study. But I remember once he came in and he said, I have a question. This is bothering me. He said, why? Because you'd cater luncheon. We have business meetings. There'd be lunches and, fancy food and sandwiches. He said, I see you leaving here every night with sacks of food. And of course once we would get rid of, I'd clean up the conference room when they were done. They'd say, Miss
Uh-huh.
Baker, come in and clean up the conference room. And I'd put it in the refrigerator. Well, that was, if they wanted to eat it, they would eat it. We would just throw it away the next day. So if by 5 o'clock there was food left, you could take it. And I said, well, I'm taking it home. He said, why? I said, because I don't have any money for
Uh-huh.
food. And he
Oh
just
no.
looked at me like I was crazy. He said, well, who doesn't have money for food? And I said, well, somebody who lives in right, has to pay for parking, has to pay for everything. I had $6 a week left after I pay all my bills and my college credits to eat. And I can buy 6 packages of broccoli at the time for $1. But I'm tired of eating broccoli. I want the sandwiches. I'm gonna take them home. And then he went home and told his wife, he said, you won't believe it. My secretary, it has to exist off of our lunch leftovers. And she was wonderful. Her name was Kathy Monahan. She said, well, this is outrageous. And so then the food box showed up once a month. Mrs. Monahan went to the store and she bought me a canned ham and rice and Kraft macaroni and cheese and tuna, non-perishables. And he came in to work with the food box and said, my wife can't stand it that a young woman doesn't have enough food, so you're getting a box every month. So they were like surrogate parents to me. They were wonderful. And then came time, I said, I really think I want to go to law school because I like what I do, what I read. It's interesting to me. I think I would be good at it. I'm a good writer. And he said, absolutely. And so they, wrote letters of recommendation for me to Georgetown Law. It's very difficult, to get into,
Yeah.
and I was accepted there. And so, that was, college was pretty much just survival, going nights, trying to keep up, trying to be first in my class,
Mhm.
which I did. And then, but law school, was a whole other kind of kettle of fish. My parents, interestingly, culturally, I was so proud to get in. I didn't think I would be able to get in. It's very competitive.
Mm.
And um, and so when I finally was admitted, they were very against it. My mother just said, we don't want you to do it. And I couldn't believe it. I said, why? She said, it's too hard. And failure is a really, in Japanese culture, failure is a problem. And we think you'll be unhappy if you don't do well and you might fail. And, so their culture was different. As you grow up in America, what you hope to be taught is you can do anything and you can achieve anything. And, but there's a culture of fear, I think, in the immigrant community. Is it too hard? Are you setting yourself up for failure? So so they got used to it. And actually the biggest compliment I ever got, because my father, very traditional person, I don't think he would ever have gone to a female doctor or anything like that. But when he went to get his will done, he called me up. He said, I went to a female lawyer just because of you. And I thought, well, see, we're making progress. Here's a man
Yeah.
born in 1920. He sucked it up and went to see a female lawyer. Isn't that great? And so you can make a difference, but it's not easy to overcome their own stereotypes, right? We have them, they have them. So I gave him, a lot of credit for that. And so that was great. I got a scholarship in the Japanese American Citizens League. At the time, they were, certainly actively trying to help Asians, get into, good schools so they could get, high-end jobs. And that was a lifesaver. When you don't have any money, I mean, if I thought I was poor in college, I was really poor in law school, and I had to take out loans. Our loans were hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to a good school. And so it was important at that time to find a good job. Otherwise, you could not service your loans. I mean, they were in 1984. I think my loans were $1,500 a month, and
Wow.
that's a lot of money in 1984. And they're even more exponentially higher then. But at the law firm, another pivotal thing that happened to me that was just a great sense of how people will reach out is so that was the time when I was in law school that they named the first female Supreme Court justice, and that was Sandra Day O'Connor. So she was the first confirmed woman on the Supreme Court. And as luck would have it, her husband, who was a very successful lawyer as well, they moved to DC, I think from Phoenix. And he came to work at the law firm where I was a briefing clerk, where I worked for Mr. Monahan still.
Mm.
And so John O'Connor was his name, and he was the first husband of a female Supreme Court justice. And so he, I also, one of the many jobs I had, I taught myself to do calligraphy because I figured out that you could make I could sit in law school at night, and they had tiers, like an arena seating. I could sit at the top with my book up, and I could write, John Brown has completed Ford Motor School brake training in
Uh-huh.
calligraphy. All I had to do was write his name, and they would pay $1 certificate. So I could make, you know, $30, $40 an hour while I'm listening to my lecture
Yeah.
and go get that money. And so I would practice at work when I was a secretary. And he came out one day and he saw me practicing my calligraphy. And I also took all the phone messages. We had no email,
Mhm.
no computer. It was all just typewriters. We wrote the messages by hand. And he said, that's wonderful calligraphy. He said, my wife is looking for a personal calligrapher to do her Supreme Court invitations. He said, would you like to go meet her? And I said, well, yes, I would. Because, I was in law school
Yeah.
and she was just the most famous person around at that time. And so he called her up and said, I'm going to send Debra over. She'll, wants to talk. She's willing to do your calligraphy for you. And I went over to the chambers and sat with her. And in Supreme Court, the justices can use the dining room there. They can hold personal or dinners. And so she would invite, she would have dinners and I would write notes to the president. It was Carter and Reagan. And then, all the other justices, Secretary of State, and they were all done in hand. I wrote them all myself in hand. And they never were postmarked because that was not the protocol. And
Mm.
sometimes she would let me go deliver them, which was nice because then I could go to the White House and I could deliver it, to the chief of staff. And sometimes I, delivered it to a senator or an army chief of staff or at the Pentagon. They all came to hers. And then I would go before the dinner and write the menu, like on a card, all the courses and and they would keep them. They had
Wow.
the seal of the Supreme Court. So that was nice. And she also was kind to me and, would call me every now and then. There was a very a constitutionally significant argument that was going to be had that she knew was going to be in the law books. She would call and say, would you like to invite some of your law professors to come with you and sit in my box as my guest, which was huge.
Mhm.
You can imagine. And so I was a second year law student and I would go to my professors and say, Justice O'Connor would like to know if you want to come to see this argument, especially my con law professor, because that's what they do. And they were like, "Are you kidding? Is this a joke?" I'm like, "No, I work for her husband." And so she did that several times to me. And so there were people along the way, that really reached out to help. And I think part of it is, they know you know, uh, you're not coming from means, you're, children of immigrants, but when they see somebody working hard, at night, I went to law school all at night as well. Never went during the day, just didn't have the money. So worked, I stayed at the law firm the whole time I was in law school, worked all day, went over to law school at night. So they see that, and they, are really inclined, somebody that works so hard for an education, they, I think, try to help you. And so, she was very helpful. Her husband was. And then when I graduated from law school, I asked for a meeting with Justice O'Connor because I thought she would give me the key to success in the legal field with all her advice. And so she said that, um, obviously for women, it wasn't difficult because, you may have read that she couldn't get a job as a lawyer either. She worked as a secretary. No one would hire her. She was I believe at Stanford, and she couldn't get a job as a lawyer. And things had, changed for the better by the time I came around. But she said, you need to wear your jacket all the time or they won't take you seriously as a woman, which I always wear a jacket. And then she said, you need to learn to play golf because that's where business is done out on the golf course. And, very few women play it. So then I learned to play golf. So I took her advice.
Mhm.
It was great advice. And, I very much appreciated, people that have a successful career rarely get there on their own. There are a lot of people that have a hand in it. So I'm very fortunate, to live in Washington, D.C. It was a really pivotal time there. And then, got a great job with a law firm. It's called Fulbright and Jaworski at the time, now Norton Rose Fulbright, but a very famous, international law firm. And got a job there. And I worked in D.C. for a couple of years as a lawyer, and then they transferred me to Houston, which is where I am now, and it was wonderful. By that time, not as much, I didn't sense much issues with racial for Asians.
Mhm.
And this is still the South in Texas, but it was a much more open community. And it was really based on merit. If you worked hard and did a good job, you could do well here. I've found that to be the case here. So professionally, it was good. I've done really a lot of my professional work. One, just to, you know, be good at my craft and environmental law. I've written several books, law review articles. I've spoken, I've taught, but I've spent a lot of time when I, had my career, I think in a good place on then doing diversity initiatives, gender fairness, inclusion, because I feel like that's something I can do, to give back. Our firm, you know, uh, we sponsor scholarships for minority law students at the schools here. We've done that for many years because it just, unless you've lived it and you don't have parents that are paying for you to go to school and you're going to night school, and a lot of them have children and they're juggling jobs, and, they don't come from families that can help. And the money makes a huge difference just in how you can study or pay just to take the bars costs a lot of money. It's very expensive. And if you don't have money, it's difficult to get ahead no matter how smart you are. So those are the kinds of things, I felt like, um, you know, I know what it's like, 8 years of night school. And then when you work in a big law firm, your schedule really isn't your own. It is every bit as difficult as people say, you're 24/7 on the clock. Um, 2 years ago, I flew 120,000 miles in 1 year, just all my cases
Wow.
alone. And so, it's a real challenge, but, that's what education can do for you. You can be a professional. And, and so, I felt very fortunate that, people helped me and that I was able to get good jobs and that I could, now I had my own business for over 20 years. That's unusual as well. A female Asian owned business. I've handled very large cases. Corporate America, is interested in diversity, and they, I think have been really open to hiring people and giving a chance. And, if you do a good job, I think it moves on along that way. And so there are now a lot of organizations that are sponsoring, more ethnicity in the legal profession. And gender was more of a problem, I think, in my earlier years than ethnicity. There's, women had to fight hard to be, seen as in the same consideration as men. That's why I play golf and I get on the golf course. But then, they have children if you want to have a family and you can't work as hard. So, there's things that are now being done that weren't available when I was younger to make it, much easier for female professionals. And I'm just excited for them. I think, that doctors and lawyers and engineers, my daughter's in veterinary school at Ohio State, and really the world is their oyster, and there's just so much opportunity, and it's so different, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, you just covered a lot. So I had a
I did.
few, it was all amazing. It was fantastic. I just have a few questions, I guess. Maybe we can
Sure.
backtrack all the way to a little bit of, your college experience. Obviously, it was very unconventional. I was looking through your website. It says, you graduated with the summa cum laude, Bachelor of Science. What specifically did you study? What subjects did you enjoy? And I guess law is just a broader discipline. There's no pre-law major. So what kind of shifted you academically toward that, end goal?
Yes. Well, mostly business related courses. Now there are pre-law courses, and they try to, you know, uh, most of the disputes we have arise out of business problems, contracts, companies that go under, or people that are suing each other because of, business disputes. And so, I focused uh, in college on, learned about labor unions, learned about economics, things that I'd never heard of. I mean, I didn't know any of that. And then corporations, just trying to find, that's what I would, I have several friends that have gone to Rice and have studied business. They have some business law courses now, and things like that. But at the time, you kind of had to piece together. And because I worked for a tax law firm during the day, they tried to get me to take tax. I was like, never will I take tax, because I think it's hard. I'm not good at math, but I had to take tax law in law school. Ultimately, it was on the bar, but I found another law school I learned in the summer, because you also have to be very concerned about your grades to get into law school. Your college grades have to be very high, and then you have to do well on the LSAT. So some of it was too searching out professors that were known to be fair graders. Um, that in classes, that English was another one. If you're going to be a lawyer, writing, expression, persuasion, advocacy, that comes in more of the English discipline, and writing, business writing. I took that. And in law school, I figured out that I didn't want to take tax law, but I had to, that if I went to the George Washington Law School in the summer, because they had a professor that was known, believed to be an easier grader, that you could transfer it back. So I did things like that to keep my grade point average up. And it's difficult when you're in night school. You're so tired, you're working all day long,
Yeah.
and you go to classes, you come home at 10:30, and then you only have the weekends to study. So, grades, because they're so important in law school to the ultimate hiring, you try to find things to take that you think you can do well in. And so,
Right.
some of the other classes, I didn't take. Now as a grown up, they'd be so interesting to take
Mhm.
now when I don't need the grades.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I mean, I guess also you mentioned like, to get into law school, there's your grades, but also LSAT. I'm pre-med, so I guess our equivalent is the MCAT, which is basically,
right.
just I know at least for us, it's a really long ordeal of studying on your own, sometimes having to afford, services that help tutor you or books to help practice, and then even, purchasing the test itself to go take it. That's both a financial and a time burden. So, for you having to work, during the day, taking classes at night, how did you manage to juggle that on top of your classes, but, studying, affording all of these resources and, doing well, obviously, because you ended up at such a prestigious institution.
Yes. Well, very difficult. I felt like, because I worked in a law firm, they were very supportive. In fact, it's very interesting about the LSAT, because now they don't have math on it. They took that off. But when I took it, there was 8 sections, I believe, and one was math. And I thought, well, what is math doing on the LSAT? That's why I didn't go to medical school, because I don't like the
Yeah.
math. I'm going to be a lawyer.
Mhm.
I'm going to write for a living and argue for a living, read contracts, but that went away literally 2 years after I took it. And I guess I took it in, I started law school in 81. So, 80, 79. I took it then.
Mhm.
No, I took it in, um, yeah, that's about the right time frame. And so I was working at the law firm, and I was just complaining to all the young lawyers who'd all gone to Harvard and UVA and Georgetown. It's like, this is crazy. I don't. They have geometry. I've gotten the practice tests. I've never taken geometry. I had one semester of algebra, somehow wormed my way out of that. And so they actually tutored me on my lunch hour. They said, we
Uh,
will, I know geometry. So they would sit in the kitchen at the law firm and try to teach me. But here's the interesting statistic. So I think there were maybe, 30 questions in each section of 8, perhaps. I had a perfect score on every section of the LSAT except the math, of which I got 15 out of 30 correct. But that still gave me a really high score, even
uh-huh.
though, and I was like, wow, if that had taken that section off, I would have had a perfect score,
Uh,
because you'll see the people that get perfect scores every now and then on the LSAT. On the bar, it doesn't, it's a different, doesn't really, there is no perfect score, but
right.
you do have a high score on the bar.
I see.
But so that was, I felt really cheated, because I thought that,
Yeah.
given that I saw back, I thought that would have been a great statistic, but so happy just to get a good score. But really it was difficult, and I had to work a lot of overtime to afford, the testing materials, to pay for the, you have to take the practice
Right.
tests, and it should go to this weekend, study.
Mhm.
And but it's expensive. And so I worked overtime at the law firm. If you worked on a holiday, they paid double time, which was a lot of money.
Mhm.
And so I worked Thanksgivings, I worked every holiday all the time. And then I worked, whenever I could. And, they were very kind to me. So I think there's, but that was my advice. Every now and then I hear people say, I'm not going to take the prep course. I'm like, oh no, you must take the prep course. My son went to law school,
Oh,
and, you better, he took the prep course. I
yeah.
made him, and he wanted to.
Uh-huh. I guess then also, you mentioned the bar exam. That's like after law school, correct?
It is. So you go through, 3.5 or 4 at night if you're going at night. And at law school, I found it very difficult, very hard. The cases you learn were written in the 1800s. They don't speak like that anymore. And, every case was 80 pages, and you're trying to figure out what is the point. You have to read it all. And they teach Socratic method, which is extremely intimidating, where we had 750 in my class. We were in small sections of maybe 90 to 100. So still 100 in every class is a lot, but they
Mhm.
would call you out, and Miss Baker, what did you think about the footnote on page 34 about, whatever? And of course we were all caught off guard. We didn't know we had to read it like that.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the process, because when you practice law, in front of judges, they'll ask you whatever they want, and they expect you to have an answer for everything, whether you've thought about it or not. So it's a beginning of a training of, how to answer a judge, and how to be ready to jump around and make sure minutia if they want it to be so. So um, very difficult, in that regard, as far as the learning part, but it prepares you, for that kind of profession.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the bar exam is one of the hardest things you can ever go through. So
Well, yeah, and frankly, I'm an advocate for making it a little bit different, because so I was in DC, I took the bar, so they have um, what they call the multi-state. So it's a whole day of multiple choice, and everybody in the country that takes it has the same questions.
mm,
But the answers are confusing. The questions are very difficult on lots of areas of law: corporate law, tax law, contracts, torts. But they have answers that are, pick the one that is the least wrong. So you
uh,
have 4 that are plausible, and
mhm.
least wrong is very subjective, and so it's difficult. That when you come out and you're like, I don't know if I passed or not, I just don't know. The next day, in DC, there's 2-day bar, is more local. Write an essay about wills and trusts. Here's the problem. tell me how to solve it. Those are easier because you can study that. And then interestingly, I had to take the bar twice because I passed the first time in DC. And then when they transferred me to Houston,
Oh,
there's no reciprocity. You had to take it all over again. Even the multi-state, which is the national, they're all the same. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I have to take it all over again. And it's most people take 2 months, 3 months off of work to study.
right.
It's that big of a deal because you can't practice
Yeah,
if you don't pass the bar. You are not able to start your job. And at the time they wouldn't hold it for you. So you'd get an offer and it's contingent on you passing the bar. So everything, all your academics, all 8 years rides on you passing one test, which is why it's a little unfair because not everybody, it's a lot of stress and it's a lot riding on it. I don't think it should have to be that stressful. Um, but when I had to take the Texas bar, they had a third day, which is Texas procedure. So you had the multi-state, multiple choice, then you had essays, wills and trusts and contracts. Then you had a third day, and I didn't go to law school in Texas, and I couldn't take the bar review because I was working in DC. So I just got somebody's notes and I got the codes and I read them in my spare time. And I flew out to, at the time when I was being transferred, the Houston office, which was the main office, asked me not to tell the DC office that they were going to move me because I had come to visit for a month. And then they're like, well, you're going to move here, but don't tell them because they'll be mad, which they were. And so I flew down early to take the bar thinking I would be able to pass maybe two or out of the 3 days. And then when I moved, I could just take the third again,
mm.
but I passed them all. So,
Wow.
without the bar review. So I was lucky, but I can now only ever practice in DC or Texas because I'm never taking a bar again. It's too hard.
Yeah. I guess
Never.
this is a bit of a transition then to kind of more of your career section. When and how did you decide to pursue your current career in environmental law?
Oh, yeah. Good question. Because most law students, I was no different. You don't always know what you want to do. There's so much. There's law is vast, and you take a little bit of everything in law school. And I didn't know. And so when I got my job in DC, they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'll do anything. I don't know." And so they said, "Okay." And so they just gave me antitrust. They gave me, contracts. It's very random. And then, so the environmental laws in this country earliest was probably 1976. The next big environmental law was 1980. And
Mhm.
then they started writing more and regulations. So the regulations didn't hit until I was a new lawyer, but they were all in the Code of Federal Regulations, which was hundreds of pages of just technical regulations. And when you work in a big law firm, what you discover is as the newest lawyer, you get what everybody else doesn't want to do. So they're going to give it to you because they don't want to do it. And it was environmental law in the early 80s was in its infancy. It didn't have any history. No one was an expert because the laws were yet to be written. And so I spent a year just, they said, well, somebody should know. We're headquartered in Texas where they have refining and chemical operations. There are a lot of accidents, things escape, there's lots of pollution, and somebody should know this stuff. And so they're like, well, Deborah, here, so you just learn it. And really that was the infancy of it. And I spent a year or more, learning it. And then indeed, there were lots of issues. In a place like Houston, you have refineries, there are spills, there's chemical, there's production. There's a lot of technical issues with pollutants. Here, air, refineries emit into the air, they, discharge into the water. So that's one reason I was transferred because they did not have the expertise. And I was a young lawyer, but nobody else had it because
Mhm.
it was new. And so then I was able to come to Houston, and it was great to be able to be kind of an expert in an area as much as anybody, because everybody, even the people that were 60 years old, were learning it new. It
Yeah.
wasn't like you had decades of experience. So we were all starting. And so I wrote, I realized that it was hard to find the laws in Texas. They were passed in between, like you'll find environmental laws in the middle of regulations about how many cattle can you store in a place because it's agricultural. They didn't know where to put it.
Mhm.
So I wrote a book, in Texas, a Texas environmental law handbook to say, here's where you find the law. And then started teaching it at University of Houston at South Texas College of Law as an adjunct professor at night.
Mhm.
And so, but, very interesting, big cases, um, that happened over time. I worked on the Exxon Valdez. It was one of the first big oil spills. You've heard of it, I guess. You're very young, but you've probably heard of it. But that was one of the first big oil spills. We worked on it when I was here in Houston as a young lawyer. I worked now on the other hand, the BP Macondo well explosion. I worked on that one as well. It's kind of bookended. So I worked on the kind of the first one. I worked on the latest one,
Yeah.
because there's just a lot to do when that much oil, gets into the environment. And, what are the right things to do? How do you clean it up?
Mhm.
There's everybody suing everybody, and then there's people that are harmed and things like that. So, but really a wonderful discipline, right time, right place. I think just coming into it at the time when it became uh, something that people, not that they didn't care about it at the time, they just didn't know about it, and it wasn't regulated like it is now. And today it's on everybody's mind. The climate change, the pollution in our waters. Or can we drink clean water? We um, working on desalination now because we don't have enough water.
Mhm.
The world is running out of water, and in Australia and in Israel, and places here, you're going to have to take seawater and you know find a process to make it drinkable to keep the planet going. There,
Right.
our water supplies. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for social good as well. When you do that kind of discipline, you can look and see, where am I going to spend my time to solve the real environmental problems of the day. And we just finished the Volkswagen case. You'll remember the Volkswagen, sold their cars here with software that is designed to defeat our emissions testing. So when we have a car, you buy a new car, we take it in, and it has to meet our air standards in the United States. And what they did was they had software. The car knew when it was being tested for emission standards on the rack, the way the wheel moved, the way the tires moved.
Mhm.
The car knew it wasn't on a real road, it wasn't being driven. And then once it got its sticker and it got on the road, the diesel models, new software knew it was being driven. They kicked in, and the result was over 40 times, the United States emissions limits. So, we're trying to clean up our air. And so that's a case, we worked on for 8 years, suing Volkswagen for local governments here. And I feel like those are, good cases, that people should not do those kinds of things. The EPA in the United States prosecute them on a criminal basis, and some of them went to jail. We brought our lawsuit on a civil basis to give also penalties and fines. In other words, you should have to pay. Our air is harmed by that. So, those are the kinds of cases. If you're in the environmental arena, if you're fortunate enough to be able to work on, there it's good for the world. I think that's sort of the goal.
Mhm. Um, I guess I was thinking a little bit about your professional timeline. The current firm you're working with, is this the same one that transferred you here many years ago?
No, so the timeline for that is I started working at Fulbright and Jaworski in 84,
Right.
1984, and uh, they transferred me in 1986 to Texas.
Mhm.
And then in 1990, thinking 91, I loved the firm. It was wonderful. It had 1,000 lawyers, offices everywhere, the
Mhm.
best work. And, I never thought I would leave. It was just perfect. Um, However, we were still in the 80s. And, it was very interesting. I got married and I got pregnant. And when news was out that I was going to have babies, the partners I worked for, they were so nice. They came in and they said, well, congratulations. We're so excited for you and we're sorry to lose you. And I said, well, where am I going? Am I getting fired? I mean, it's unbelievable. They're like, no, no, it's just that it didn't occur to them that once you had babies that you would stay. I mean, that was the mindset. Most of their wives didn't work. They stayed home. And, my husband was in graduate school at Rice. He had a 3-year master's degree. He was a student, a full-time student. My father had died by that time. My mother had to move in with us.
Mhm.
She was extremely, still very Japanese, did
Yeah.
not know how to do a lot of things on her own. So she moved in, and then she promptly got cancer over the next 10 years. So I had to pay for, 2 kids coming. My husband was in school. My mother lived with us. She was terminally ill. And there was a lot of financial responsibilities on my plate. So I couldn't stay home. I
Mhm.
needed to work. And so I
Yeah.
just, and they were great. They were like, oh, it's great that you're going to work. But I just thought, it'd be, um, uh, there was a lot of also looking for talent from other law firms and
Mhm.
others, another law firm that had formed, called up and said, look, you need to come work with us. They're so progressive. And I said, well, I'm pregnant with twins. It's not a good time to make a move. They're like, why should that matter? And I thought, wow, how amazing. Now it's the norm. I mean,
Right.
people don't even think twice about it. You have your leave, you come back, it's great. Back in the day, it wasn't like that. And so I thought, well, I need to go work. And then, in a large firm, the advancement at the time was based on seniority. So even if you were handling a lot of things and you could do good work, you would not move up until the next person, retired. And
Um,
so if you were ambitious and you wanted to head a section or you wanted to be in charge of a lot of cases, you know, I think those people, took a chance and said, well, maybe I can do better, and it is a big chance. It was very secure, in the big law firm at the time. And then I moved to a firm called Mayor Day, Caldwell and Keaton, 120 lawyers. I headed up their environmental section. I had 9 lawyers that worked on the cases, and it was wonderful as well. Just, I never thought I'd leave there either. But interestingly, I had a very large case for the Port of Houston Authority here, and a company had made DDT back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and it had polluted the bottom of one of our ship channel areas. And
mhm.
so they hired me to try to help get it cleaned up, and we ended up suing the company to get them to clean it up. Our law firms, the plaintiff representing the company that had done the pollution, wanted to merge with my law firm,
Mhm.
and we were the plaintiff suing that law firm's client, the defendant. And so that's a conflict. You can't have both sides in the same law firm.
Uh-huh.
So the merger could not happen with me in the case in the law firm. And the client, I had worked on it for years, wanted me to continue with the case. And it was a big case. We resolved it for $100 million back in 2003. So ultimately, we worked out something where the firm said, well, we'll buy out your interest. We'll set you up in your own law firm. You take the case, and then the
Mhm.
rest of us will go, to the other law firm, which they wanted to do. So, and that was in 2001.
Mhm.
And, at the time I had a young daughter, newborn, two boys in grade school. My mother still, living with us, had a lot of medical bills and things. And I thought that's the worst time in the world for me to start up my own business. It just
Yeah.
couldn't be any worse. It's a lot to ask, a lot of
Yeah.
work, but it was also an opportunity, right? To see what we could do. I could always go back to a big law firm if I wanted to. So we started, this law firm. So it started in 2001, and here we are today. 23 years later. Still here, having handled some of the best cases, around. So I'm really proud of that. Being able to very few women-owned businesses that are handling cases like we have, and that have sustained it for decades. So I have great clients. The public sector has been wonderful too. I do a lot of work for the governments, but in private industry as well. And it just gives you freedom to take the cases you want. We really look at is this a case we want to bring, or are these clients we want to work with? And some we turn down, but we have freedom to do that. So, that's just been a wonderful thing. Professionally, I just couldn't ask for anything better.
Yeah, that's amazing. I guess I have
Yeah, it
two
is. Well, it's a
questions.
far cry from being a kid from, whose parents didn't finish high school, right? To
Right,
having your own.
right. Yeah, I mean, you said what, three people graduated from your high school and moved on to college. So from there to, Georgetown, from DC all the way
Right?
into your own firm, that is incredible.
Yeah, it's a long journey, but it's been wonderful.
It's related, but I guess I have two questions. Firstly, you did speak a little bit about, gender and diversity earlier. Maybe you can speak a little bit about your experiences in, your big firm that you were part of, and then maybe more so now. But what what was kind of like the demographic of the people that you worked with? Were you one of the few Asian American women that were working in law at the time, or do you feel like you had a little bit more of a community in your, workforce?
No, I knew of no Asian American lawyers in my
Wow.
firm,
Hmm.
none. And in my section, we had a section of maybe 30 lawyers, 5 women, 4 women. More came later, which was great. That was right at the time when women were going into in the 90s, going into law school in more record numbers. And so we had lots of people coming after, but when we started, it was we were more the family that we had were the few women that were there, regardless of race, um, and ethnicity. It's just that we were women, and there were so few of us. And then, in fact, when I was in DC, they had meetings. They had monthly legal meetings for all attorneys, and the place they met every month didn't allow women. I think it was the International Club or the F Club. I can't remember what it was. Very fancy club, old line, but no women could come in to have lunch. And so I'm like, well, what are we going to do? I can't come to the lawyer lunch.
Uh,
And they're like, oh yeah. I mean, it was kind of hard to believe.
yeah.
And so, and then in Houston, the one or two things I remember, I loved the people I worked with. I thought they were, you know, they did not mean by any chance, I don't believe, to discriminate or any of that. It's just their reality was, women didn't work much. Their wives stayed home, and that's what they were used to.
Mhm.
So, they didn't quite know, I think what to make of all the women suddenly in the workforce. But I do remember one instance on a case I worked on, and I had prepared all the evidence, gone through, and we're going to go to Oklahoma City, which was so exciting to me because I was going to go on a business trip and get on a plane and fly somewhere. It was a
Uh,
big deal. And because I was the person that knew all the evidence, and the partner was going to take a deposition, and I could go and watch. And then a couple of days before, they came in and said, oh, well, you're not going, and
mm,
you need to prepare, somebody else. And I said, well, why am I not going? Because I'm the one that knows everything. And they said, oh, our wives don't let us travel with women.
oh,
So the wives thought it was inappropriate for their husband to be going out of town on a plane, staying in a hotel
yeah.
on a business trip. So I did not know what to do with that. I thought, well,
Yeah.
that is pretty unfair. And now
Mhm.
I have to teach a guy who, what I know.
Uh,
And so he can go with you, but I can't go. And, I think they were sympathetic. They were like, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much more afraid of my wife than I am of you. I said, well,
yeah.
okay, I understand that. But it's just the way it was. It
Right.
wasn't an intentional business wide decision. It was just more of a cultural thing.
Mm.
And of course, now it just seems like so funny because, we all, my daughter went to school in California. She went to UC Santa Cruz, and they share the same restrooms, they share the same showers, all
Yeah.
the genders and everything, and they
Mm.
didn't think a thing of it. And it just would never have been the case. I couldn't even get on a plane with somebody that I worked with because it was not appropriate. And but those, that was short lived, and time changed that. So, but there was definitely concern. Did we have opportunity? Did we have the same opportunity? And then I did later. hunt up more of an Asian community here in Houston. There was an Asian American Bar Association, and there were, but there just weren't many people that, but a small group of us. And now, I am on the board of the Japan American Society Houston, and do work in trying to kind of bridge cultural gaps between Japan and here. Interesting work in that some of the trips I've gone on, um, like places like Houston want Japanese companies to come here,
Right.
and we want business, right, and jobs, and they want to come here because they have no land left in Japan to manufacture. We went on a trip to Kikkoman soy sauce in
Mhm.
Japan,
Oh.
and they yes, and they have to, they need to fulfill the soy sauce demand. They need to production, so they look at like Wisconsin and Georgia and Texas were places they had an interest in locating because we had space, and soy products and things like that. Soybeans could grow here. That's what they need. And I went there, and they wanted to know, I met with the wives of the executives that were asked to be transferred, and they wanted to know, what's it like for women in America, and it's wonderful. They had watched TV. They want to know their kids, like they have their own bedrooms. Children have their own bedrooms in America, whereas your traditional Japanese families live in a common
Right.
area, especially in Tokyo. There's just no room, and so they were fascinated by the fact that you could have your own career and that type of thing. And the executives at Kikkoman, they had a young lady get up and give a presentation, and one of the executives came and said, that this is like the first time we've had a woman, give a presentation on a trade mission, but we saw that the Houston brought so many women, and it was wonderful. I thought that was a great thing. That their society is transitioning into that as well, but they're a little bit, um, I think more to be done there. They weren't as used to it as we are, but it's nice to be able to do that. So, I think, but from here, there, Houston it's got a good Japanese community, but from the legal side, it's pretty small.
Yeah.
When I went
I-
to, I would go interview at Berkeley. I remember we would recruit when I was at the big law firm. They would send us out to recruit law, and almost everyone was Asian
mm,
that I recruited. They were, and I thought that was so interesting in California. There were so many in
yeah.
Texas, not so.
I was gonna say that because I've spent pretty much most of my life in California, so it
Mm.
there are a lot of Asian people. There are a lot of Japanese people there, so
Oh
um,
yes.
yeah. I guess just a quick follow-up then, what was it like 20 some years ago being a woman slash minority lawyer, starting up your firm, trying to do, both the business side and the law side? What were some challenges or some, of your experiences with that?
Sure. Definitely challenges, um, but by and large, amazing. People were great. I don't have really any complaints about it. I think the funny ones is you learn, like even like with my dad, you have to be tolerant of people because we all have a built-in bias, or we have a prejudice. We make our first impressions on how things look. We try not to, right? That's why they teach, bias classes and all that now. But when I first started, there were some interesting, I'd greet a client at the door and he'd give me his coffee order. And I thought, oh, he thinks I'm the secretary.
Uh-huh.
So I would go get the coffee and
Mhm.
say, here's the conference room. I'll be right back. I got the coffee. And then I'd sit down and pull out my legal pad and say, well, what can I do for you? And they were like, oh, you're the lawyer.
But yeah.
And I said, yes, I'm the lawyer. I did have another one that was interesting. Uh, Sometimes people would ask, is this your father's law firm? Did you inherit it from your father? And I just said, well, no, my father was not a lawyer, and I didn't inherit it from anyone. We formed it and worked really hard. And so to me, those were the biases. The initial biases were, somebody gave it to you, or you inherited it, or you were a staff member, that you weren't a lawyer.
Mhm.
But those were really um, kind of the minority. That wasn't the majority at all. Even 20 years ago, firms and businesses were wanting more gender, I think, parity and ethnicity. So they were perfectly willing to, let us work on. And of course, some of the cases I've worked for the same clients at two different law firms. I knew them for 30 years. So they knew who, I was here. And so that was good. And I would go visit with them and say, give me a chance. I can work more efficiently. I'm less expensive. I can be, I'm innovative, give me a shot. And for one client, it was very interesting. We saw that they were hiring people and we thought, oh, we have way more experience than who they're hiring. And we happened to run into the lawyer that was doing the hiring. He said, let us work for it free for you.
Mhm.
Give us your problem. And, he said, well, I need to solve this problem, by Monday. So will you give it to us? We're going to work for free all weekend. And if we can't do as good or better job, then, don't pay us. If
Mhm.
you think there's worth in our work, then you can decide what to pay us, and you just pay us what you want. I mean, it was just it's a weekend. It's like, let me see what I can do.
Yeah.
And it led to a long relationship, with that client. We did figure out some things that others, maybe hadn't seen, or maybe had fresh eyes that
Yeah.
looked at it. And it was very valuable, and they kept coming back. But I think when you are a little bit different, you have to be a little more innovative. You have to, look for opportunity. You have to, and I think for, gender wise, I think it's hard sometimes for people that are of different ethnicities, hard to ask, to say, I want you to give me work. I
Mhm.
want you to hire me. And because we think if we show up and we do the right things, they'll see that they should. But I think that's something that, depending on how you were raised, some people are less shy about that than others. But in the business world, at some point, you have to be prepared to kind of ask for what you want. And it's sort of hard.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, I think your persistence and your ability to interact with people, amazing skills. I see, like, and we touched on already, you played some major roles in some of these huge cases. What do you think, like, how do you feel like some of your skills or your traits contributed to you being able to, be charged with these cases, be able to take them on and then successfully finish them out?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think first and foremost, what I would say to any entrepreneur, business person, doctor, lawyer, anyone, there is no substitute for being an expert or being the best in your field. If you can do it, if you have the luxury of time to learn, if you're a neurosurgeon and you're going to specialize in this thing, I would focus on, I want to be the best at that thing, because when people are in trouble, they will look for the person they think is the most qualified, right? If you want somebody's going to operate on my brain, I care less about how much it costs, is how good are they, and what is their track record. And so I was fortunate in an early time when the environmental laws first came out, I was able to really develop I think it's a unique specialty. And so, when you to get hired to handle large cases, you have to show you have the expertise and the knowledge of the regulations, of, how to make those connections, how to answer difficult questions. And it's heavy on the science, which, I had to learn some of that too. But I think if people see that you are, somewhat of something of a specialist in your field or an expert, that's part of it. Because if you want to play in the big time, you have to have the qualifications to do it. So, what I tell the law students that I teach is, if you want to be a labor and employment lawyer, you should try to be the best one there is, and let people know, publish,
Mhm.
speak, teach, get your name out, and then they will know who you are. And I think the other component is an interesting one. It's, the law, particularly, it can be very controversial and adversarial. Is probably the best word. We each have a side. Everybody wants to win. There's a lot of unpleasantness. There's people are condescending. They don't always tell the truth the way that we all think it should be told. They omit facts. People are trying to win,
Mhm.
and I feel like you can be an advocate for your client without being nasty or ugly or demeaning to other people. But we see the TV movies of lawyers and how nasty they can be to each other, and some of it's dramatized, but we do see that, and
Mhm.
I feel like I'm like, I don't need to do that. I can talk to a judge and put my side out there without belittling the other side.
Mhm.
Sometimes I have to say, judge, I'm going to show you why they're not telling you the truth,
Mhm.
as opposed to saying they're a liar. There's ways to say that, right? You can say it in two different ways.
Mhm.
And so, I think if you don't have to make enemies, um, then it's probably not a bad thing and to be thought of as fair. So I think some of it is just, let's try to problem solve. We can fight all we want. I get paid to argue with people, and so I'm happy to do that if that's what they want to do. But a lot of these legal issues can be resolved without being in court. They can be, I think there's a way to settle it and try to, let's just see if we can't get somewhere everybody can live with. And I think that's another quality, in addition to having the grasp of the subject matter you must have, but are you a practical person to
Mhm.
try to solve the client's problem? So, and that's not always the case. So I felt like that was a quality I had. I tried to, we sometimes you go to these corporate things and they try to identify factors. And one was, I thought was an interesting word, was likability. I'd never heard it.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, likability is a really good thing because people do want to work with people they like.
Yeah.
And so we should all try to have more likability. We shouldn't, if we don't have to be gratuitous with insults, and we should try to, everybody's a person. They all have personal problems, and they all have parents, and many have kids, and they probably are good people all around, but they're not showing you that side right now. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be treated like good people. And my other thing is, I thought, well, at some point, I'm going to keep trying, and I'm going to try to make them like me. And sometimes it works. They may not start out not liking you because you're on the other side, but I think if you're a good person and good natured and fair and nice, it could end up well. And so that's, and relationships in this town, very much about relationships and,
Right.
keeping our word. And, there's favors done all the time for each other, that are appropriate. So I think that's good advice is, you should always, try to do right and not make enemies if you don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think expertise, honor, these all play a really big role in being, prominent and being a leader in your field like you are. So, I guess my last question in this section. Also, I do realize we are coming on up on time. Are you okay staying a little
I'm
bit?
fine. I'm good.
Okay. We just want to wrap this up and then we can kind of go more towards like a little bit about your family and personal life, and
Sure.
that should be about it. But this is all great conversation. And I guess I just want to touch up, like you mentioned earlier, you're involved with a lot of these organizations and societies such as Japanese American Society Houston, Night Court Lawyers, Entertaining for Charity, I see. Are there any specific significant organizations or affiliations that you have that you kind of want to elaborate a little bit on?
Well, over the years, I think our bar associations um, are, they have foundations, and we run charities through that. I've been the chair of the Houston Bar Foundation, um, and that's, had the ability to take proceeds and distribute to hurricane victims and things like that. So there's, in our profession, a lot of work for our bar association to help, people that have legal needs. And our night court lawyers entertaining for charity, I'm particularly proud of that one because, I've been in it, and then I've produced it and I've written it for decades. And we put that on the Hobby Center here in Houston or at the Wortham. And, it's a great community event. It's, 50 lawyers or more, singing and dancing. Some have talent, some have none. We don't really care. It's just, a great community event once a year, and the whole town comes. I mean, we play to 2 to 3,000 people over 5 nights. And it's just a great community event. But the charities that we help are law related charities. And so the ones that are the most touching are, for example, to give money to charities that provide legal assistance to children. And, for example, a child, witnesses domestic violence. They see their father shoot their mother, and they're 6 or they're 8, and they have to go to court and they have to testify. And there's no money to hire a lawyer for that child. The family doesn't have it. And so our charity, the proceeds from night court go to charities like that, where we can hire a lawyer to represent that child in court, to work with them, to make sure they're, taken care of, that they're not more terrified than, of course, they're going to be. We give money to um, organizations that for child support. People can't track down their spouses to get child support that they're due, that they need to support the children. And we'll donate lawyers to go do that for them, and then to give free legal advice. So that's been a very big thing. It's been going on for 3 decades. And, it started as just people that wanted to, they wanted us to do some skits at
Mhm.
one of the bar functions. And we thought, oh, we can write skits and we can sing, and it was fun. But we can make more of this. We can take this, get more lawyers, actually put it on the stage, sell tickets.
Mhm.
And then I came up with the idea that we would add continuing legal education. We all have to get credits to keep our licenses every year. 3 of them have to be an ethics credit, which is harder to get than just, watching a video or going to a seminar. And so I began to write into the show, because have been writing the scripts for decades, um, ethics.
Yeah.
And then we would say, okay, if you come, if and the tickets is charitable deduction, so they can take a tax deduction. You come, you can get an ethics credit toward meeting your,
Mhm.
continuing legal education goals. And that was great. But then we got to teach. We did one show, on why you should go, the value of jury duty, because no one wants to go to jury duty. It's inconvenient, it's difficult. And we wrote a script where, someone had been wrongfully convicted and sent to jail, and the jury figured it out and they were freed, and, based on things. But it taught a lot of people, here's why you go to jury duty. And here's how people try to get out of it, but that won't work because these are the rules. But, we're able to provide, most of the time people only see lawyers. Your average person is, if you have a divorce, you got to bail somebody out of jail, right? That's kind of, or you get a ticket. Those are the times the average person is going to see a lawyer, or you need a will.
Mhm.
And so we can teach people, there are rules against, if you're in an accident, a lawyer is not allowed to come visit you in the hospital and try to sign you up. That's
Mhm.
because you might be impaired, right? You might not be, of your own free will. That's illegal. And so we were able to, you know, do a skit that talks, that shows it, and that they're, here's the rule. We tell them the rule. I can't tell you how many people said, I had no idea. People, they call me all the time. Every time I get in a fender bender, all these
Uh-huh.
lawyers call. I'm like, well, that's completely illegal. They can't do that. And they didn't know. And so, it's a great vehicle for, teaching people basic rules of law that help them in their daily lives. You don't have to answer questions, you know, if they ask you this, or, what the law is on searches and seizures and things like that, if they pull you over. And getting legal education for those who are keeping their license. Plus, over the 30 years I've done it, we all started out as youngsters, and uh, been doing this for decades. Half of our group went off to be judges. Some of them went off to be politicians. The networking was phenomenal. And so we would never have met those people. I don't know how to go meet new judges necessarily on my own, but you grow up doing things, and they become, senators or politicians, and you can call them, because
Mhm.
we spent decades together, dressing up as, Chewbacca or Star Wars characters, silly shows, crazy costumes. So you become very good friends. And so it's opened a lot of doors to people here. And so networking is a very necessary and fun, part of building a career. And that's, so I'm very proud of that. We networked, we met people, we gave lots of money to law related charities. And, we teach people a little bit about the law. And it's just, it's an annual event that I know will, carry on for many more years than I have time to do it.
Mhm. It's great to see you so active in your community and,
Oh
play.
yeah. All my kids have been in it too. When I needed a child actor, I was like, come on, you're going to be in there.
I guess, yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about you outside of, the office, maybe a little bit more about your personal life. I guess maybe we can start with where you met, how you met your spouse, and kind of a little bit more about your current family.
Yeah, I mean, how I met my spouse, actually really interesting story because, as a young lawyer, when I was here in Houston, we literally worked all the time. I mean, you're learning, so it's hard. It takes a long time. And we worked 7 days a week, always, always on Saturday, and then took Sunday off if you could. But if you had a Monday morning docket call, then you would come in on Sunday. So no time to meet anybody. We're always there till 9, 10 o'clock at night, and you're tired. And you're trying to build your career. So I thought, well, I'm in an office. There were 600 lawyers in my, 12 floors of my office or so. And we
Mhm.
had a Facebook. It was very interesting. And so we'd all know who each other were. And I thought, well, first I'm going to meet all 600 of these people. So
Mhm.
I know who they are because they're going to be my colleagues or my bosses. And then over time, I said, well, I'm not doing very well meeting people on my own. I would like to get married and have a family one day. And, I'm, getting up there in age because once you go through college and graduate school, you're not a youngster anymore. So I started a campaign and I let everybody know. I said, each one of you are a highly educated, nice person. We all work together. Every one of you must know one man, one person who's nice,
Uh-huh.
who would like to have coffee with me, and I'm going to hold you to it. I mean, you cannot tell me. You all went to school here in Texas, most of them. You
Mhm.
all have friends. Your wives have friends. Your kids have friends.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to call upon you. Everybody has to produce one person for me to have coffee with. And I was relentless. I mean, I'd see him in the elevator, the people from another floor, and I said, have you found me a coffee date? Have you found me a coffee date? And they're like, oh God, here she comes. And
Uh-huh.
so they started doing it. It was really funny. And
Uh-huh.
they, well, here's one of my old fraternity brothers. He's single. And I said, well, I'll have coffee with him. So I was just going through the numbers and it was kind of a joke. They thought it was really funny. And I
Mhm.
said, no, that's how you get things done. You have to
Right.
work the odds. And we didn't have Facebook. I mean, we didn't even have voicemail. And so there was no computer dating where you could search for somebody like you. It didn't exist.
Right,
It
right.
had to be through people you met once you're out of school, when you in the pool of people you meet in school. So one of the lawyers that worked for me at the big firm, I would constantly say, I'm not going to stop asking you to introduce me to one person. Once you do it, you're off the list. You don't have to do it anymore. And so he said I was going to California on a business trip. He said, now I can do it. My old college roommate lives in San
Uh,
Francisco, and I'll call him and get a coffee date, and then I'll be off the list, right? I was like, you bet. So he did. And the guy called me up and said, I'm Jim, I'm Lance's friend.
uh-huh.
And, Lance says you would like to go out and I'll take you out. And I said, great. And I'm bringing another lawyer with me, another woman. You need to bring somebody for her too. And, and he was so nice. He's like, okay. And so we went out there and we met them. And it turned out the man I married was the gentleman he brought from my other friend. So, the other lawyer, this is Peter and he's going to be Kathy's date. And I said,
uh,
that's great. And then I was like, well, no, I think Peter and I should, go out. And so we commuted. He lived in San Francisco. I was in Houston, and we started dating long distance for a year and then ended up getting married. He wanted to go to graduate school in architecture. And so I said, well, why don't you try to, see if there's Rice will take you. It's a great
Mhm.
school. And so
Yeah.
he applied and they gave him a scholarship. And so he moved here. So that was,
Um,
but I thought that was, I tell my kids that because they're like, we can't find anybody to go out with. I was like, well, you got to play the odds. But I
of
thought that, people still talk about it. It was fun. I met a
Mhm.
lot of people. that way. And I figured out of all those people, everybody could have one person I would like, and so that was nice. That's how I met him. And then he started his architecture school. We had twin boys who are now 32, and then I have a daughter who's 25. And the interesting thing I will say for working women, who are worried about it, some of them, you know, it's hard to raise kids and have a full-time job. I took my kids when I would, you know, go give speeches. I would take them with me and sit in the back and listen and learn something. And I dragged them around. They went to night court rehearsals with me, and then and then when they grew up, I asked them later, because I traveled a lot. I was gone a lot, and I said, what do you remember about being in grade school? And what do you remember about me? And they were like, oh, you were always at all of our basketball games. You were at every school play. That's not entirely accurate. But I think they remember me because when I was there, I was very loud. I was the loudest cheering mother, or whatever. But they believe it. I mean, and I think I think we all beat ourselves up a little too much with guilt. Mom and dad guilt that I'm not at every single function.
Right.
And I think kids are pretty resilient, and we went on great vacations. We ate dinner lots of nights together, and it just meant I had to work after they went to bed to finish what I needed to do. And that's what parents do anyway. I think these days you have to. And so, but I thought it was great. They have great respect. The boys definitely, are interested in women that, that work, that have the careers, that, are educated, and that's good. And my daughter's working on her third degree. She got a degree from UC Santa Cruz. She's got a master's degree from University of Houston. She's in veterinary school at Ohio State.
Mm.
She's on a great trajectory. One of my sons is a lawyer, and my other son is a professional surfer. He travels the world and teaches
Oh.
surfing. It's wonderful, and he competes. He is right now working in Nicaragua, and they'll go to New Zealand. He's based in California.
Mhm.
So he's living the dream, but it's very different. He could not imagine sitting in an office.
Yeah.
He needs to be out there on the beach, but it's great. They've all done well, I think. And so that's, feel really good about that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like your traits such as diligence, being adventurous, all of these things, resourceful, they definitely have filtered their way into your children's lives in one way or another. I guess one question I always like to ask my interviews are, what are your hobbies and interests outside of
Ah,
your career?
yeah, I have a lot. I mean, the night court was one of them because I like to sing.
Mhm.
My husband and I had a band
Uh-huh.
together with several, all lawyers except for my husband, I think. And we made some CDs and performed weddings and things like that. So that was fun. I've always played tennis. I belong to lots of tennis leagues. I travel to play, and then now I'm in play lots of golf. So
Mhm.
there's really not enough time in the day for all of my hobbies, but I play, um, you know, team tennis. We travel, we compete. It's really fun.
Wow.
I play senior women's tennis sometimes too. And then just, ladies golf league. And like I'm leaving tomorrow to go play with some ladies in Florida. And we
Wow.
go to Colorado to play. We travel all over to
Mhm.
play sort of, mini tournaments and things like that. It's really, really fun. So the sports take up all the time that I'm not practicing law or, being at home.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of my dad. He loves tennis and golf.
Oh yeah.
Those are like he whenever I'm home from for break or something, he's in the backyard just swinging his golf club. He bought like one of those little nets, with like the little target on
Yes.
it. He's always
Right.
swinging into that. Yeah, but yeah, I guess
Well, my
then.
son is based in near San Diego. He's in near Laguna Beach, kind of that's where he bases
Oh,
in California. And so whenever I go visit him, I play golf over at the Monarch there, or
yeah,
by in Torrey Pines. I've played near San
yeah,
Diego. That's the great Muni course.
right,
I've
right,
played
right.
that a few times, and so that's one of my favorite places to go to play golf. So I'm really envious of anyone who gets to live there because there's great golf courses.
Yeah, It's I my dad tried to teach me a little bit. He told me, you're gonna have to play with people when you get older. But he gave up on me. I wasn't very good at it. So now we
Never
play.
too late.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess then my last few set of questions are the ones I'm required to ask you, and they just kind of delve more into identity and perspectives. And they don't have to be super long, just straight. I guess like firstly, how do you identify yourself ethnically?
Sure. I identify myself as Asian American, always have. Um, and that's, because at the beginning of my life, that's how everybody else identified me. I was the Japanese girl from the Japanese family. And so that's how you think of yourself and always have. And culturally, when you live with a person of, different culture, I think, it's just part of your DNA. When my dad died, my mom, they lived in Florida and she still didn't know how to put gas in the car.
Mhm.
She didn't know how to go to the bank. He did everything. That was just a traditional, the man did everything and, she didn't know how to do that. And so I'm like, well, you know, and she didn't think her English was good enough. She never, was a great English speaker. And I said, well, it's time to learn. We're gonna go to the bank. We went to the bank every day, and
Wow.
I had her write a check or take money out. When I made her put gas in her car so she could, do basic things. And then when she moved in with me, but she gained a lot of autonomy. But there was no question ethnically, that we were Japanese. And then from my husband's side too, his father, was raised in the Japanese culture.
Right.
So, it came from both sides. And my son, when he he went to college in Colorado, he took Japanese for the first year because that was just, he felt like it was his heritage too. And then found out how hard it was. That was one semester, I think, and that was the end of that. But, it's they feel it for sure.
Amazing. And then kind of related, but what do you feel most proud of? Very open-ended question, I know.
Oh, it is very, very broad. Um, I think it's, a couple of things, and they don't go in a ranking order, but I think really proud of, you know, being able to own a business, to be able to, run a law firm with my colleagues here. We just renovated a space on the 64th floor of the Chase Tower. It's a wonderful historic space and it's really kind of a dream I think people have and having their own business, but it's hard to do, and we got there through a lot of happenstance, circumstances. I'm not sure it would have happened that way if things hadn't spun out that way. So I'm really proud of being able to run a business in America as an Asian American woman. um, Really proud of raising, three kids. And I think, raising them in the value, passing on the values that my parents passed on to me, because that's where it all comes from, really. All the things I learned, I learned from them. And I don't want that to be lost. And, trying to, and, make sure they're happy and successful. So, and I think, those are kind of the two things. I think most people are, uh, take pride in their profession and then in their families, and that's certainly in my case.
And then my last question is when and where do you feel most at home?
Most at home? Well, I probably would say, in the office, that I've been doing it for 39 years now. I come to the office every day and I make a list of things I need to do. And, I like writing. I like legal analysis. And it's a really comfortable place, to come where your craft. And it's an adventure because every day something new happens, a new case comes up, suddenly somebody's been wronged and they need help, or something is blown up, or there's a catastrophe it needs solving. So it's not like a job when you work for yourself, it's kind of an adventure.
Mm.
So, I feel good about that. I like coming to work. I don't have any plans to retire as long as I enjoy it. So I feel really comfortable there. I do like going home. My husband's got a degree in landscape architecture, and I told him once, I said, when I come home, I want to feel like I'm on vacation somewhere special. And, I want a backyard that looks tropical.
Mm.
And so he built a wonderful backyard where, so you come home from all day in the place I like, but it is stressful and you're tired and it's a lot of work. And then you come walking through the door at home and you go into your backyard and it's kind of palm trees and hibiscus and bamboo, and you sit down and it feels like you're on vacation because, I don't take that much vacation. So I feel like I should have it at my house. And he's done a great job. I will say the freezes we've been having here have just kind of not been kind to my backyard, but
Uh,
and so, and I like to be out in nature. That's why I like to play golf. It's nice to be outside. I feel like people should get outside more and just, enjoy the green and things like that. So I think, all those places. I like to go to work. I like to go home. I like to go to the golf course. All those places are comfortable places for me.
yeah, I mean, I'm assuming this is your office behind you right now. It
It
looks
is.
like
It is. I
I
have some
think
of my Japanese things
right,
with
right.
me. Yeah.
The
And it's a
flowers.
great office in that it was it, it was the Houston Endowment space for 40 years, and they were a big charity that
Mhm.
Jesse Jones, for his proceeds, very philanthropic, and they built it out with the wood that you see behind me. You can't even get that anymore. That's 40, 50-year old, burled wood that comes from, I'm sure, a rainforest somewhere. And then, but it was old space, and they moved and built their own more modern building. And I came and looked at it, and I
Mhm.
just thought, you just don't see that kind of
Yeah.
beauty, anymore. And it's not particularly modern. We updated it and made it, a little more modern with wiring and lighting and paint. But it has a really, it's quiet and calming. We sit 64 stories up in the tower and you can't hear anything. And it's a great place to think
Mhm.
for thinking good thoughts, and very peaceful. And you think about it, no one calls lawyers when they're happy. You only get the call when they're in trouble, they want to sue somebody, they're being sued, something's wrong. You don't call your lawyer when nothing is wrong. And so they come here. And I thought, I've been fortunate enough to have a kind of a serene, peaceful place. It's quiet.
Mhm.
It's, it looks like a law office, and people come in and they just say, well, this is very relaxing. And it's, they can tell us, whatever their problems are, and we, try to help them. So I thought that was important too. It's just, and that's very Japanese. The Japanese have a serene culture. That's what they want. And, a thoughtful, quiet is very, Zen type of thing.
Right.
That really is what it's like here. And it's, if you ever, get here, I would love to come. Yeah, I'd love you to come see it. If
I
you're
would, I
downtown,
mean, I'm in Houston. I
yeah,
can take the train down and visit. I'm no
please
architecture
do.
expert, but I just love the wood and I love the way the sunlight's looking on it right now, and
It's
it just looks really
beautiful. And
peaceful.
the view, you can't see it. I'm at my office computer now, which is stable, but
Mm.
the views are unbelievable. From,
Yeah.
there's an unobstructed view. We can see almost all the way. It looks like you can see to Galveston. I can
Um,
see to Sugar Land, and you can
mm.
actually on a clear day see the curvature of the earth
Wow.
from as high as we are. It's unbelievable.
Okay, I will email you sometime and I will,
Email me. I'd love to have you over.
yeah. Yeah, then Miss Baker, I guess, is there anything else you would like to add that we have not covered yet?
Well, I do, as a closing comment, I think, um, I would go back to my Veterans Day article. I thought that was, to me, very profound, um, thought about racism in America at the time in 2018. When my dad died, it was in 1990,
Hmm.
and his brother called and said, he can be buried in the Baker family cemetery, but when your mother comes, it's her time, she cannot come because, there only whites can be buried here. And I'm like, what century are we living in where that's just crazy? They've been married for, 40 years. So, but I really did appreciate, I did call Arlington National Cemetery, and not only, did he get a big funeral that was paid for by the government, she did too. And, we had another funeral for her when she died. A parade, the caissons, the 21 gun salute, the trumpets. It was, pageantry at its best, but I really thought that was so interesting, that someone who was, vilified and treated so poorly when she came here just to be a wife and mother and an American, and she's a citizen, you know, during her beginning times here, and then at the end of the day, could be buried in really one of our more sacred, burial grounds, and embraced. So I thought that was wonderful. I really thought, good for our country, and it was a good sign for me. And I think we've just really have come a long way toward our thinking, and I'm glad to be able to talk about it because once the people that were alive in the 50s and 60s are gone, those things will fade, and they won't really be remembered. So I have a good memory of it, and appreciate you and your institution for letting me preserve it for anyone who wants to see and take a look back on how things used to be. And we've made a lot of progress, and it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to take the time to thank you for offering your
Oh
experiences
yes.
and your stories. You'll be an inspiration to people who minorities, women, people who want to go into law, even people just kind of fighting against all sorts of challenges. And I think, this will be an incredible addition to the archive, and it'll be great for viewers to be able to learn from your stories for, years and years to come. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'll look for an email from you. You definitely need to come visit.